Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk Data, the podcast for IT professionals by IT professionals. In this episode, we're going to be discussing data bias and how it's impacting our daily lives and its implications for artificial intelligence. Let's Talk Data is brought to you by Proact and NetApp. Your hosts today are myself, Tony Gent, Christian Lehrer, and Lisa Marie Enan.
So when I checked the news, I found an article about data bias, a German article where it's like data bias is still a problem for companies. And I was like, okay, the podcast is called Let's Talk Data. The topic is data bias. Maybe that could be something interesting to look into. So I read a bit about it, and it's about data bias in artificial intelligence. And basically that it's known, but that people don't really know how to get around with it.
I suppose bias is a thing that we probably had to deal with anyway, from the point of view that from a statistical analysis perspective, that's difficult to say. Statistical analysis, you've been using data, you've been taking into account biases, I assume, anyway. Is this more of an issue with AI simply because of the scale?
I just feel like we don't have the reasoning that goes into the data that we get into AI. So basically, if staff members are hiring new people, you don't give in the reasoning why you're hiring X, Y, Z. And AI is just using this data without knowing the reasoning. So maybe somebody was bullied by Luke in school, and now the system doesn't hire Lukes anymore just because it doesn't know where it comes from, basically. Just like a small example. I mean, it's much larger than that. But if the reasoning is not clear, it just overtakes the data. And if we don't know what we put in there, and where does the data came from and which biases maybe go into the data, then we have a big problem using it later on and getting that bias out of the data.
Yeah. Either that or just not fond of Star Wars. That's the other possibility, I suppose. No Lukes.
But I think that's why you always should have a secondary name also. Maybe that would help.
Skywalker.
No, just kidding. But what you say, Lisa, is very, very interesting because also I think last week I read an article where it has a study where they checked on different AI models on if their answers in which direction they tend, more leftist or more right-winged. I don't want to bring in any politics here, but it's really important also the different models and the training data that really bring in that kind of direction of the answer. And I think that's also exactly what you mean, right? With the data bias, you have to understand what is coming in there to interpretate, German, English, great. God.
I'm English and I couldn't have said it, so it's fine.
to really understand why the answer is the way it is. But is that all that is data bias, or are there other ways that data could be biased somehow?
I think we use it in positive ways as well, don't we? I suppose things like when you go into Spotify or when you go into Netflix and you choose to watch something, then you immediately get a selection of elements that other people that the algorithm believes that you will also like. So essentially, it's utilizing your bias for that particular type of element and presenting it. I've noticed the same thing with Instagram and with tweets, whereby they will deliberately take your biases and feed them back to you, which is a very odd situation because essentially it's reinforcing your view of the planet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, also you have it with news and social media and stuff like that, this classic confirmation bias. So it knows you're reading this and that news article, and it's just playing back this kind of news to you every time because the algorithm knows, okay, you're reading that. And even if it's just a small percentage, like especially now in times of the coronavirus and stuff like that, where there may be more extreme kind of news, it's feeding back to you the same information that you're reading. And so it's, not giving you the full spectrum of information that you would need to get the full picture, basically. Yeah.
We had the same thing with going back a bit. We had the same thing in a strange kind of way, or in a slightly a negative way, I suppose, with Cambridge Analytica and the US elections, whereby they purchased off Facebook loads of data about the individuals that were utilizing Facebook who were interested in voting, and then depending on their biases, fed them different adverts to define. So if you were a Trump supporter, then you would see an advert of Trump doing well and people who were high-profile supporters of Trump being positive about him. But if you were on the fence and you weren't sure which way to go, then they would feed you adverts that were Trump's opposition, Hillary Clinton as it was at the time, being accused of corruption and this, that, and the other, and sort of being on all that negative information. So they were literally taking your biases and manipulating almost population to try and get a vote, which seems a little bit bonkers, but it's something that's becoming far more prevalent these days with biases.
So, and you can see how far these topics go. Like if you hear data bias, you think, yeah, okay, maybe there's a statistic that is not quite right or something like that. But with data being so relevant in our everyday life with algorithms and stuff like that, I mean, your Netflix recommendation is maybe not the biggest problem, but like news and all. I mean, I don't know what your Netflix algorithm gives you. If it's not good movies, then it's maybe a big problem. But the way bigger problem is like the political impact and all of that.
Yeah, it's impossible to change. I don't know about you. I watched. I have Instagram. I post photographs from time to time. But you get little Instagram shorts these days, whereby they just show you a short of. Let's say for you, Lisa, a dog running around, because there's lots of shorts of dogs running around. It appears to be a thing. But I watched a couple deliberately on sharks, because I'm fascinated by marine animals anyway. But now all I get is sharks. It's like shark, everything. They throw a shark at me one every 3 videos almost, just because of the fact that I was quite interested in that subject once. But how do I now change it? I have no control, but I'm now forced to like sharks, if that makes sense.
That's like the Amazon algorithm. When you order one fridge, then they give you a lot of new advertising for fridges, and you think, okay, good, I just need one, that's fine.
I'm fridged out. Don't need any more fridges.
I know a lot of people who have several profiles, also for TikTok and so on, where they say, okay, this is the one I know the algorithm is doing stuff with it and it won't be able to fix anymore. And then they have their normal profile where they just have everything in. And I think as long as you don't put in Sharknado to your Netflix, then everything might be well in the future.
There's nothing wrong with Sharknado. It's got sharks in.
And tornadoes. Yes,
yeah, of course.
But coming back to the social media thing, I think that's really an issue when you have that kind of echo chamber model. When you just, as Lisa, as you said before, it's feeding you all the time the exact things that you already believe in. So you over time completely get lost of the other opinions or reality or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? What do you do to not land in that echo chamber?
I don't know that you can. That's the challenge with social media, isn't it? You're fed with what they believe you want to see, because the more time you spend there, the more adverts you look at. So, and that's how they make their money. So it's a funny animal.
If I remember correctly, there's a news site that is not using any algorithms. So it's trying to bring a broad variation of news into your feed so that you have the whole picture, basically. So it's trying to get away from that algorithm. But I think with Facebook and all the other social media sites, there's no real way to get around it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I did deliberately put in some... I follow some people who I know I don't agree with, just to be able to see those other opinions sometimes.
Good idea.
But other topics of bias, do you know that when you are searching for a new car and suddenly you see that type of car everywhere, is that also bias? Some unconscious bias maybe in I don't know, recognition bias, or I don't know what the wording is, but
that's an interesting one.
Do you know that?
I don't know about recognition bias. I know there's availability bias. I've heard of that one.
Maybe that's
that essentially tends to be that's what's the way? Infatuation with the new. You see something new, therefore that's the thing that's on your mind. Therefore, that's what you do. If that makes sense. That's a big thing in the IT industry, though. I think. I remember years ago when, say, 2010, 2012, when cloud first came out. So essentially, EC2, S3 had all been released. Azure had just released its first cloud-based product, and every conference I went to was cloud this, cloud that, cloud the other, cloud is the future, cloud is the way forward. It's all about transitioning. It's all about transforming. And throughout the whole of the 2010s, I went to meeting after meeting where MDs, CIOs, financial directors would sit there and say, "We've got a cloud-first strategy," very proudly. And they worked maybe to try and transform their business, but most of them probably didn't. And most of them that did probably came back, if that makes sense, from going to the cloud. Because I think at the end of the day, it was something that everybody was told was the future, but in reality didn't really understand what it is. And I think, but it became the bias. It became the target that everybody wanted to aim for. And I like the cloud. I think the cloud's a fantastic thing, but I think it's a transformative piece of technology. You have to change your business to be able to adopt it. You can't just take what you've got and dump it into the cloud. It doesn't work. But if you redesign your architectures to be able to take advantage, it's a spectacular thing that will really change the way that your business model works. And I do think a little bit is availability bias. That is the fact that people look at it and go, "Ooh, I've got to be doing that because everything's telling them that it's the way forward." And I wonder a little bit if we've got that a bit with AI now. Whereby for the last year,
Tony,
it's been AI this, AI that, AI the other. I'm getting big, sort of AI trauma. But is there too much AI? Is that just another availability bias whereby we're being pushed down this road?
Well, especially regarding AI, I think oftentimes it's also just rebranding. Clippy, if you remember Clippy, that would be called an AI now.
What, the paperclip from Microsoft Word?
Yes, exactly. That would be an AI today. So,
First, you're not old enough to mention Clippy, to be honest. You need to be older to be able to mention Clippy.
No, I know Clippy, and I know Bob, the dog, also.
Oh, nice. Yep.
Yes, so... But thank you.
Word 97, wasn't it? I'm not sure. Anyway,
I think so. Yeah. Well, regarding bias, I think what's also really important to understand is also, especially in IT, but not only, is this phenomenon that when you have an idea of kind of what tool you want to implement or what solution you want to bring in, that you always find the positive things side of that tool, and you tend to automatically do the presentation that is kind of flattering to that product and maybe not too much to the other ones, which you would not like too much or something. What I found really to be hard to then be objective about it, to be really honest to, let's say, management. This is product A, has this benefits and this contrast, and this is product B, and not to, turn the list around, do the lighting a little bit better here, and smaller letters there or something. Do you know that also?
Trying to think what the word is, but know of it certainly. But yes, I've seen that a lot because we all have our own personal preferences. So is it preferential bias? I don't know, but we'll have a situation whereby we like something and therefore it colors our opinion, especially if we try and present.
So I think that's also going in the confirmation bias direction. I think it's basically, if we're doing it on our own, it's also like a confirmation bias where we're also trying to, like if we're scanning through articles, we jump to the articles that are, the algorithm is doing it, but we can also do it ourselves, like going through and thinking, perfect, that's the article that says my tool is the best. I haven't read the 5 articles beforehand that says it's maybe the second or third best, but yeah, that's going in a similar direction. And also what I think is quite an interesting topic is the selection bias, so that you don't maybe have a broad enough database to do statistics on it. I mean, if you have 1 year of data, it seems like a lot of data. But for example, I had a case when I worked as a workforce management consultant where you do staff planning. And there was a beverage store basically that wanted to plan their staff members for the next year. And the year beforehand was the World Championships in soccer or football, depending on where you are. And then the program was like, okay, yeah, we're planning 20 staff members on that particular Tuesday. And it didn't make any sense at all the year after that, because there was no World Championships in soccer. So nobody was buying beer, at least not as much as it was beforehand. So that could be a thing, that your data scheme, or there's not enough data, or that you just have data of a particular region like Germany, and other regions are behaving differently. So I think that's also a big thing you have to look out for.
That's historical bias, isn't it? The end of the day, the statistics that you have are based upon a particular time frame, and that time frame is then different. I was reading an article on an Australian white paper, whereby they were talking about historical bias when it comes to sort of, let's say, for example, you run a company that does personal loans for people, and they want an AI. They want to train an AI to automatically accept people who, you know, were good candidates for a personal loan, so rather than having to go through large form filling exercises. And what they found was that the AI itself was falling short of the discrepancy between male and female salaries. So for example, if a man was earning back in 2011, 2012, maybe 30% more than a woman was for the same role. So consequently, they were finding that they were discriminating against women, which is illegal, because of the fact that when they put their wages in, it would automatically show that they were earning a little bit less. But if they then looked at that data by comparison to, say, 21, 22, that bias has been slowly disappearing. We're paying women a lot better now by comparison for the same job than we were men. We're still not level pegging, but we're not far off. So actually on new data, then all of a sudden it was being far less biased. But the problem then is, well, great. So you say, well, let's use the latest data. But then you use the latest data, and because the sample set is so small, you can't train the AI properly, and it doesn't do the job right. So it's a real issue from the point of view that all of the data that we have is by definition biased, because our culture is changing over the last, even over the last 10 years, we've changed dramatically about the way that we do things.
Yeah, I remember an article that I read out of the medical field where it was about skin conditions. And the data was mainly from white patients and lighter skin tones, where you have a lot of reds in the skin when there's something wrong. And on darker skin tones, it obviously doesn't work that way. So they had completely to retrain that data set to make it possible for like doctor assistant system to also help patients with darker skin tones, just to get the information in there right.
Did you ever take a look at the health symptoms for heart attacks between male and female patients? So men have completely different symptoms when they have a heart attack than women have. And all the books that teach about it always have only the male symptoms in it. So there's a bias that's really dangerous to only the half of the population of planet Earth. So we should do something about that. So it's everywhere. Bias is everywhere.
Only half the population. I'm amazed though. Right? You see that's a very weird piece of information. So all you see on the movies where the guy's arm hurts or he's holding his chest, all that's only men.
Yeah, mostly.
Are women far less susceptible to heart attacks?
No, they aren't. But oftentimes it's recognized way too late.
Wow.
They have. I don't know the symptoms in detail. I'm not an expert there, but there are definitely differences. And everybody listening to that, maybe you should look that up to help everyone.
That is interesting. I've got to say, generally speaking, the only place you ever see heart attacks, touch wood, if you're lucky, is on television and cinema, and I don't think I've ever recall seeing a woman have a heart attack on television or cinema. It's almost like it's solely something they do to blokes in stories for some reason. I don't know quite why that is. Also a bias, perhaps.
So yeah.
Maybe.
One last thing that I think is really interesting and that we need to keep in mind of is a example from policing in the United States of America.
Oh, yes.
Where basically there is a feedback loop that it's amplifying the bias. So basically they have routes that AI knows, okay, the police car is driving that route mostly. So it's sending them there. And because the car is so often there, they find crimes there, obviously, because if you are 80% in the same area, you stumble upon a crime every now and then. That's just how it goes. And then basically the data that's been feeding back, or that we are feeding back to the algorithm, is just amplifying that bias. So that's also a thing you need to be aware of, that you're not feeding the bias even more with the way you're using your AI.
How do we call that? Predictive policing or something like that?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah, I think that's what it was called in the article.
I was going to say, I've got another confirmation bias one, I think, which was you always, you think things are changing when you see it only, when you perceive it. So I think the example may be something like you walk down the street and see that a car window is broken, then immediately think there's more crime in this area now than there used to be, because of the fact that you've now experienced it, therefore it changes your perception.
I saw it, now it's true.
It must be,
right?
yeah, exactly. Therefore, by definition, it must be a thing. Not just one person got his car window broken, but the fact that it must be more crime in general, which is a bizarre situation.
So, and then it was a kid throwing a ball or throwing a stone, and it just broke it, and it had nothing to do with crime.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, those kids all the time. Those kids destroying everything all the time.
So you're one of those men. Do you steal balls when they come into your back garden? Is that what happens?
Yeah, I have the kids pushing out the balls to the other neighbors.
Right, I was going to say. I thought maybe you were standing there with a knife ready to puncture them and send them back. That sort of stuff.
The large fork, and the fire and
pitchfork.
Everything. Yes, pitchfork. Thank you.
Okay, that took a darker turn.
Well, it's bias, right?
Yeah, it is bias. Okay, good. So this is horror movie bias. Let's go with that. So, do you wear a Jason mask at the same time, or just walk around with
the Scream one,
right?
The
a Scream mask. Okay, good. We don't want to just be biased to 1980s horror movies, do we? Let's be honest. Okay, so interesting thing though, is there any way that we work around these? Is there anything that we can do in our daily lives that will reduce bias? Lisa?
So I think it's very important to make sure that you have a broad database. So I think that's the first thing you need to do, to make sure that it's covering all the regions that you want to cover and that it's a long enough timeline. So basically, if you're not collecting your data now and you want to use things like data science and all of that in the future, make sure you start selecting your information now and make the database as broad as possible. I think that's one of the most important things. And then be critical about your own data and your own statistics. So look at it and try to take a step back and think about which bias maybe could be in there, or if you have any confirmation bias, that it's going in there, and maybe also get other people into the boat and let them take a look at the statistics and maybe give their thoughts to it. I think being aware of it and making sure your database is a good one are the two most important things from my perspective.
Christian?
I think be the picky colleague before the picky colleague sees your stuff. Like Lisa said, be aware of it. Just be aware of the possibility that you are biased in some way or form, and then that should help at least. I think,
and that's it. I agree. You need to have two people with anti-biases so they can cancel each other out. That's the ideal way. But you're right. I think the key thing is we need to understand that we're biased about everything. We always are. So we need to be structured in our approach when it comes to this sort of things. But yeah, no, I, like you say, even when it comes to sort of selecting a product for something, then you may have your own preference, but try and find a way of balancing that out to make sure that you're choosing something that ticks all the boxes, not just the boxes that you liked. So, excellent. Great, guys. Thanks very much for that. That was an interesting discussion. And see you all at the next one. If anyone's got any ideas as to what to do with regard to future topics for discussion, then please just let us know. Thanks very much.